Hey, Sebastian. Thanks for being on the show.
Happy to join you. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get into the rapid fire set of questions. Um, if you were the governor of North Carolina for one day, what would you be doing?
Um, that's a good question. You said there was going to be some interesting questions. That's a good one to start with. If I was governor today, I would. That's it. That's a good question. So, one thing you'll find out about me, I'm very pro-life. It's one of the clients that I represent. We would have a pro-life bill that's signed into law if I was governor today. So I guess that's my answer. I'm sure that's a little controversial, maybe for some of the viewers listening to the podcast, but that's what we believe. So I'd sign it into law.
Okay. Why do you think it's important for the youth to be in government relations?
Yeah, for younger folks to be involved in government relations, I think it's important because, ultimately a lot of the decisions that are made on the government level, whether it's state, local, or federal, is going to directly impact the career opportunities that young people have to grow in the economy of North Carolina. And that's part of the reason I got involved in politics. I know that's probably going to be a question later down the road, but when I was going through high school, half of college graduates couldn't find career jobs in North Carolina because the economy was struggling. I thought that was unacceptable. So I made it my mission to help volunteer for candidates to change the direction North Carolina was going in so younger people could have opportunity in our state. And, a lot of folks say politics doesn't impact them or they keep their head in the sand. And I think that's a mistake. Politics impacts every part of your life. And whether it's just a donation, helping someone at the polls, or doing your civic duty and voting, you can really make a difference just by doing those few things. And it really doesn't cost a lot of time or effort to do so. So I encourage young people just to, keep up, even though it's a frustrating process sometimes, and it's hard to find good news, but try to keep up as much as you can because it does impact you one way or the other.
Good answer. What would you be if you weren't a lobbyist?
That's a good question. My in-laws have a small family business. I'd probably be working a lot harder at that. Thank goodness I'm blessed to have a strong father-in-law who has built a successful company. I work for it a little part-time now, so I guess I'd be doing that a lot more full-time, helping the small business succeed. But he's done a good job over the past almost 30 years of developing the business where it's pretty much sustainable based off his hard work. So.
How would you educate the common public the role of a lobbyist?
Yeah, the role of a lobbyist is to what we do is we specialize in issues. Legislators, there's 120 in North Carolina, and they come from all different walks of life. Some are lawyers, some are doctors, some are small business owners. There's a lot of experience that is at the General Assembly, but they don't know everything that goes on within the private or public sector. And that's our role as lobbyists. We are the experts. For me, I represent the Police Benevolent Association and NC Values. So when it comes to law enforcement needs, I know a lot about what's going on the ground with rank and file law enforcement officers that I'm able to educate folks at the legislature about. And they really appreciate the role is not to tell them there's the stereotype that you come in with briefcases of money and just give it and that's how you get things done. That's really not how it works. What happens is you spend time educating folks in the building about this is what's going on. And sometimes, a lot of the time, they ask really tough questions. Well, have you thought of this? And then you bring it back to your clients or your membership. And maybe folks didn't think about it this way, or there was a clarification in the law that we just didn't understand, or maybe someone in Charlotte wasn't implementing correctly. And the processes work out like that. So it's very interesting if you look back at the macro view of how lobbyists and politicians and elected officials interact. It's more like education based, and both sides learn a lot. And I think that's how the system's supposed to work. But at the end of the day, the goal of a lobbyist is to get the legislation for their clients passed. And oftentimes, it's a cage match between two different entities, oftentimes two different lobbyists saying, well, this is how we perceive it, that's how we perceive it. And then it's up to the legislator to make the decision of who they stand with or who they agree with on the positioning more. So a lot of it's just an education process.
What three skills you think are essential for a lobbyist?
I think communication, organization, and um, competency. You have to have competency when you're coming in. A lot of the folks at the legislature are CEOs that have been successful, small business owners who build a small business, lawyers who've built a small business in a law firm or work at top law firms in the state or have had a successful career, or doctors. You have to be competent because they're going to ask you hard questions and you have to know what you're talking about. So those are the three skills that I'd recommend.
What do you think is the most momentous thing in your career?
As a lobbyist,
Sure.
um, I guess for clarification on the question, like what's the biggest thing that I've accomplished as a lobbyist? Is that what you're getting at?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So, um, well, we passed it in the House. We didn't get it done in the Senate, but there's a bill called the Mickey Hutchins Act where um, the officer was close to retirement age. And in North Carolina, that's 30 years. So imagine serving 30 years as a law enforcement officer with the current political climate in law enforcement. And we have been advocating several terms now for retirement age to be brought down where they can pay out of pocket and pay after getting further training while they're a younger cop to have that retirement age to 25. Unfortunately, as he approached his retirement age after 30 years, he was unfortunately at a bad scene where his life was unfortunately taken. Um, and he was not able to retire and spend that time with his family. So the bill was named after him, and we got that through the House unanimously. The wife of the fallen officer, Miss Hutchins, was at the legislature that day, and to see the bill pass the House, it's one of those things where you've helped law enforcement maybe have a chance to spend a little more time with their family after service to our state and to our community. They keep us safe, and see that pass the House, that was very, very joyful. We still have more work to get it through the Senate, but hopefully the day will come when that's signed into law and we will know it as the Mickey Hutchins Act, and his legacy will live on. So it's one of the things I've been the most proud of to work on as a lobbyist in the General Assembly.
That's really inspiring to hear. What is your favorite book or hobby?
My wife is the reader between us. I don't do as much reading as she does, but because I'm busy reading legislation, which isn't fun. But hobbies that I enjoy doing is I've really got into the gym recently. I'm trying to get into the very healthy fitness life. So the gym is the most relaxing place after a long day at session, just to go in there and do some cardio and do some weightlifting. That's what I really enjoy now.
Cool.
So,
And what is the hardest part of your job?
hardest part of your job is sometimes they say no. Like the Senate, unfortunately, and I ran for the Senate in 2020. And unfortunately, they decided not to take it up this long session because certain politicians, not in the Senate, but in the state overall, were against the legislation. So that's the hardest part of the job is when you have a good idea, lots of people think it's a good idea. Like I said, it passed the House unanimously, and then just to be told no without much clarification is very frustrating. So that's the hardest part of the job.
And what drives you or what motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, to leave my state. I'm a scout. I'm an Eagle Scout, and they taught us in scouting to leave your campsite a better place than you found it. As a lobbyist and as someone who's been involved in the community, I want to leave the state a better place than I found it, and that's what drives me to continue to fight, even when they say no to good ideas. That's what keeps me going. Is how can I leave our state a better place?
How would you define happiness?
Happiness is at the end of the day, or the feeling you get when you've done something good. Some of that comes from integrity when no one's watching. Is you get that good feeling with what you're doing? Are you making a positive impact on your community? Are you serving others? I think that's where happiness comes from me.
That's really good thing you said about it. Let's get into a bit into your childhood. Let's talk.
Absolutely.
Where did you grow up, and how was your childhood like?
Yeah. So, well, my mom unfortunately had me very young. She was 15 when she got pregnant with me. Unfortunately, she was taken advantage of at a very young age, 15. Had me when she was 16, so I was born to a single mom, and my grandparents didn't have much to their name either. Um, and my mom met my dad, my stepfather, when I was 2 years old, and he was mowing lawns, starting at very ground zero. There, I always joke because I worked to pay for college through, and I ended up working at Taco Bell. Their date night consisted of one burrito and one soft drink, where they cut the burrito in half and share the soft drink because that's all they could afford. But so they started from very humble beginnings, and I got to watch growing up. And as a child, you don't think about it, but luckily, I've become very aware of how hard and how much sacrifices they've made in their life to ensure that I had a better life than them. Sometimes people don't realize that until, after your parents are gone. Luckily, I'm blessed to have recognized the sacrifices, and I continue to thank them every day for everything they've done for me. So I got to watch my dad work his way up from mowing the lawns to being the director of operation over 200 sites, as a water treatment career. So he was in the water treatment industry, and my mom was blessed enough to be able to, through the sacrifices she made, stay home and ensure that we had a loving, supportive family and kept us out of trouble growing up. So I became one of the first in my family to graduate high school. My mom worked hard, Northwest North Carolina school graduate, but I grew up in Austin before coming to high school, where Austin is an interesting place. A lot of people are moving there now. It's a very successful economy, a very successful place. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunity happened for my father. And when they moved here to North Carolina, he continued to grow in his career. But like I said, the economy was struggling. I started high school during the Great Recession. So I graduated high school in 2011, and I saw people were struggling. And that's kind of what interested me in getting into government affairs is, look, my mom decided not to have an abortion through the advice of her doctors, the judge. She was in and out of state custody. All these people encouraged her. They said, you will not make anything out of your life if you choose to have this child. And she chose to have me. I'm only here today because of that brave decision that she had. And she proved everybody wrong. She's successful. They're upper middle class, very successful folks. And she's made sure that I had a better childhood and better life than she had. And that's what the American dream is. And so that's what's created this overwhelming passion for me to ensure that those opportunities are available to other North Carolinians and other Americans as well. And even if I'm playing a little role in that as a lobbyist for law enforcement, my father started off before he was cutting the lawns. He was in law enforcement. So to go back and be able to help people like my father, who was on the field, working night shifts, working day shifts, 12-hour days, and represent them in Raleigh is a blessing. And NC values where I can work to protect children, the unborn, like I could have been part of the statistic of the unborn, and to protect mothers and give them the right information in the right areas so they can so they can have help raising that child if they're all alone and they feel like there's no resources to educate and provide those kind of resources is a blessing as well. So that's kind of a little bit about my story, and why I'm so passionate about government affairs and giving back to the community.
So at what point did you step into government relations and political science? I see you got a degree in Texas A&M University. So at some point you would have felt like, oh, okay, this is something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, so I was in debate in high school. I saw from a holistic standpoint on paper how kind of government works. Continued to pursue, and I knew in high school when I did the debate team and saw how effective I was at. So there's mock Congress, which is what I competed in. How I was sufficiently answering some of those questions, and I could argue both sides. I know people are right and left, and it's black or white for a lot of folks, but in high school debate, I had to argue both sides, which really showed me that I am concrete in my beliefs. And that kind of inspired me to continue to seek that kind of education through the college level. I knew I wanted to give back. And right after I graduated high school, I volunteered for a local state house candidate, Representative Hardister. He is kind of my older brother, my mentor, and he was able to get elected when he was 28 years old. Young people serving in office and government relations, he's a perfect example of someone who's been very successful as a young person. He was one of the youngest members elected, and he's now the youngest, longest serving majority whip in the history of North Carolina. So helping out on his campaign and seeing the success that we were able to achieve at his young age inspired me to continue studying and going to Texas A&M to receiving my political science degree. And when I was unfortunately unsuccessful in the state Senate race, I was approached by the PBA, who I had worked with in Representative Hardister's office, saying we could use your skill set working with the majority whip and applying that to lobbying. And I decided to take a chance and run with that. And the rest has been history. We've seen some pretty good sessions since I've joined forces with the PBA. So.
Oh, I see. And so now looking back, like, and if you had to advise someone who's really wanting to get into government relations, would you suggest that they run for office like you did, or be a campaign manager, or start working for an organization?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think one of the best things to do for someone who's interested in government relations is to maybe work at the legislature, or even if it's on the federal level, work for someone in Congress, because you get a whole new dynamic feel. A lot of people think it's solely the legislators that make the decision. A lot of the time, the legislators lean heavily on their staff to make informed and intelligent decisions. Because, like I said, when I was Representative Hardister's policy advisor, we had sponsored, not voted on, but we sponsored over 100 pieces of legislation. And for a member just to keep that in their head at all times, it's very challenging to do. So, John and I worked very well together, and we relied on each other heavily. He relied on me to, keep him up to date with what was going on with the legislation, if there's any amendments that need to be done. And I think working on staff and seeing it from a staff perspective and having that relationship with the legislator is imperative to having an understanding of how to get things done in Raleigh, because I've seen several people that want to get things achieved in the General Assembly, but they think going to Raleigh and just yelling at legislators is going to get you through the finish line. Even if you have the best idea, if you don't know how to have that relationship with the legislator, it's going to be very challenging for you to get things done. So that's my recommendation. It's not the only way to do it, but I think it's probably the best way to give you a foundation on how to be successful at that. A lot of the top lobbyists in North Carolina were involved in some form or fashion with the legislature or with leadership in either party, and or a former legislator themselves. So those are things to keep in mind. So running for office certainly helps you if you're fortunate enough to get elected.
And do you why did you start running for office? What was the reason behind it?
Yeah, so what helped guide me is we were able to be successful at getting policy through, but a lot of the legislation, we were one of the top ranked business states in the country. So when I told you I first got involved, it was because the state was heading in the wrong direction. Well, we righted the track. We had some of the best business climate, but the governor kept vetoing our great legislation. And what we needed was our supermajority back in North Carolina. We lost that in the 2018 election. And in 2020, we were in a position before COVID to regain those seats. And that's what really inspired me, is we could get things done that continue to help the people of North Carolina. Unfortunately, and it's both parties, not just one, is when they're in the minority, it's, even though this could be a good idea for the state, out of party principle, we're going to stand in the way of it. And I just don't think that's the way to do business. So that's what encouraged me to run, is I saw a lot of good ideas that were falling through the cracks because of the veto and because they couldn't override the veto. So that's what inspired me to get involved in, my family story. I didn't want someone not to have the same opportunity I had growing up. So.
And This was the state senate, right? You were running
That's
for.
correct. Yes.
Got it. And what did you learn from it that you are currently applying in your current role?
Well, the big thing that you can always learn in politics is you don't know what's coming tomorrow. Like I said, I didn't know that there was a lawsuit coming that would derail the district and make it way more competitive. I didn't know that COVID was coming that would shift polling dramatically. I didn't know a lot of things. And, it's how we respond to adversity is continuing to grow as a person. And that's what I've continued to try to implement as a lobbyist. Because, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be people tell you no, is how you respond to those adversities defines you as a person. So, as long as I can continue to evolve on how I respond to adversity and continue to improve and find new solutions despite the adversity, I think that'll be a win at the end of the day if I continue to grow in that aspect.
And do you foresee yourself running for office again?
I'm enjoying lobbying now, giving back to law enforcement and fighting for the values of North Carolinians that we believe we share is something that I'm enjoying now. I don't know what the future holds, but right now I'm at a good place where I feel like I'm contributing to the state. I'm contributing to making North Carolina a better place for families. So I'm going to continue to do that unless I find an area to do that where it'll help more North Carolinians.
So now that you are working with two different organizations, can you tell us a little bit about? I know like you're deeply involved in these two organizations because they probably affected you the most from a personal standpoint. Can you tell us, like, is that something you foresee yourself like continuing down that path, or are you planning to expand your areas of expertise in other areas? What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm happy with my two clients that I currently have. We're in the process of getting a few more, so we'll see. Knock on some wood. We'll see what happens in the future. But currently, I'm very happy representing because it's a difference when you bring personal experience from these areas and you can bring that passion into the workforce. I think legislators see that, and I think you know when they employ you and they see that you're as passionate as you are about it because that's happened in your life or you've had your father serve in law enforcement and that when he went to work when he was younger than I am now that he didn't know if he was coming home in the evening and his mom had to worry about that and those are real things that impact people and it gives you an extra motivation to ensure that you're working 120% for these groups.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit of, I know you mentioned one of the policies which you worked on. Can you talk a little bit about anything else which was really challenging and which maybe inspired you to do more?
Yeah, well, all that's the thing about the organizations I represent. A lot of the issues that we deal with, whether it's the Mickey Hutchins Act and 25-year retirement, whether it's whistleblower protection, where law enforcement officers who, come out and say that, well, my superior did this and I want to report it so we can improve the community's understanding of law enforcement that they aren't the bad guys and 99.9% of law enforcement aren't doing the bad things. But is there protection if we tell on the 0.1%? There should be if we are serious about having a better law enforcement community. And then PTSD is a hard conversation to have of law enforcement officers who've seen something horrific happen. Are they receiving the help that they deserve? A lot of these are challenging issues. And then you flip to NC values where we're working on, some of the things that the children are taught in the classroom or pro-life legislation after Dobbs case was announced by the Supreme Court or a lot of these are challenging, controversial issues that are hard decisions for members to come to. And while it might seem common sense to me and the organization that I represent and thousands of North Carolinians, it's still at the end of the day, polling on some of those issues are very tight. So we have to be understanding of different points of view, and we have to we have to understand it's going to be a challenging thing to get these things done. I was joking around with one of my clients while we were having lunch. She's like, "Yeah, you really choose the hard clients, don't you?" And I agreed, and I was like, "Yeah, I need to add some more easy clients so I can get things over the finish line," as a joke. But I have helped other groups out receive money in the budget. We've gotten things done for them. There was a group out in High Point that I helped get $4.5 million for, and that was pretty easy. The New York Times, Forbes, they were in articles all over the country talking about the great things that they're doing in High Point, and to be able to show legislators that was a no brainer to get that in the budget for them, and that was very easy to get done. And um, it's not always a bad thing when it's easy to get done. So.
And if you had to share with the experience, different kinds of experiences you've had, and you had to share some nuggets of wisdom as to what are the do's and don'ts of lobbying, what would they be?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I've seen is the number one thing you don't want to do is to be disingenuous with members. You want to tell them if they ask a hard question and you don't know the answer, just say you don't know the answer. Don't make something up where they could find out that's not the truth, or they get up there in a committee and they could possibly say the fact that you said to them, and if it's not true, you're going to make the representative or the senator look bad, and that's not going to it's not going to come back positively on you either. You want to have trust. That's the number one thing with the legislator that I strongly recommend, is building that foundation of trust, that you're going to give them the right information, you're going to give them good information, and even if it's something that might hurt your bill, it's always important. There's always going to be another opportunity. There's always going to be another bill you're working on, and just keep that in mind when you're going through the legislative process. Trust is foundational to getting things done.
How do you strengthen your network?
How do I expand my network?
Yeah.
Yeah, just having conversations. You're in the building with a lot of other people that are in the building, and whether it's just coming by a senator's office and asking how their kids are doing or how their wife's doing, or if you're having lunch and you sit with a new lobbyist that's maybe frustrated going through a bill that's unfortunately been killed by the Senate or by the House, have those conversations with folks, and you never know when they're going to be able to come to your rescue. One group that we reached out with this last session is the firefighters, professional firefighters from the Police Benevolent Association standpoint, and they've been tremendous partners. And we really hadn't tapped into that as much as I would have liked us to in the past, but now we have a great foundation with someone who has gotten the legislation. They've gotten PTSD, or they're also working on PTSD, and they've gotten similar legislation that we can follow the model to how they got it done, and we can follow their model and join forces with them and hopefully get it done for law enforcement as well. So those organization alliances can really help you at the end of the day.
What resources or tools do you use to stay on top of the legislation?
Yeah, so shameless plug. I know it's your podcast, but I definitely use your legislative tracker. I mean, there is I can't recommend anything better than that. That is changing for our industry. Is when I was working for the whip's office, I wasn't familiar with your legislative tracker, and when you're working on 100 pieces of legislation, I wish I had it back then. So if you're someone that's looking for something to give you that competitive advantage, legislative tracker is the way to go.
Oh, so. Wow. You're kind enough to say that. I was actually mentioning as far as like any news articles you read on a daily basis, anything like
sorry.
that.
Well,
no,
hey, well, well, what I always do is put in things on Google Alerts. Google Alerts always kind of keeps you up to date with things that are going on, whether it's our state or the federal level. I'm sure it can bombard your email. I'm blessed to have a great wife who, whether I want to hear it or not, she's going to tell me what's going on in the news and what she's finding passionate. So she's just as into politics as I am, which I'm blessed to have married up and found someone that has the same passions as me. Yeah, so cool. She's my golden resource of, I didn't know that was going on. Thanks for telling me.
That's awesome. With that, we'll jump into the last segment where the platform is quite open for you to talk anything about yourself, your passion, your future. Anything goes here.
Yeah, well, I just hope to continue to help North Carolinians. The one thing I've always promised myself is if I feel like I'm doing it more for me than I am for others, then I'm going to just stop doing it. But right now, I feel like I'm making a difference for law enforcement officers. We have over 60,000 members, and when we travel the state and do different candidate interviews, I get to really interact with those members on the ground level and talk with them about what's going on in the field. What are they seeing? How can this legislation or this amendment or what was put in the budget, how is that helping them? What are they seeing? Because a lot of laws, believe it or not, sound great, and then it doesn't implement the way you think it could, or there's unintended consequences. They just always continue to have those conversations, continue you to grow and get a better understanding for, because I'm not in law enforcement. And my mom is not that young woman anymore who is pregnant with me, and to go to pregnancy resource centers and have those conversations with women or with law enforcement officers from the PBA standpoint, it's continuing to grow is what continues to motivate me, and doing it for them. That's who it's about. It's not, a lot of folks think it's cool to be a lobbyist. You're getting paid unlimited money, which is not true. But it's really the service aspect. The question of happiness earlier is that's where I get the happiness from, is when we pass the legislation, it's making a difference for that 15-year-old woman who's like my mom, or 15-year-old girl that was like my mom, who we're actually making a real difference in their life, or law enforcement officer that he didn't lose his job when he did the right thing and reported a corrupt officer. Those are things that will make a difference in our state, and that's what keeps me waking up and fighting harder than yesterday. So,
Sebastian, I can't thank you enough for taking this time to spend it with me. You are a very passionate individual. I wish you the very best in your endeavors.
I appreciate it. Keep doing these podcasts. I'm going to go back and listen to them so I can find out what's going on in the lives of other lobbyists that are like me. So I appreciate you doing this.
Oh, thanks again, Sebastian. We should meet soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.